The council ship came out of fold space like it owned every star in the sector. No warning, no hail, no request for docking clearance. It simply appeared, 3 times the size of anything Dara Wills had ever seen up close, its white and gold hull catching the light of the nearest sun like it was built to be admired. Dara was in the middle of signing off on a cargo manifest when her navigator, a quiet man named Pell, said 2 words. "They're broadcasting." Dara set the manifest down. The signal was not on any standard human frequency. It was on all of them at once. Whoever sent it wanted every ship in the sector to hear it. The voice that came through was translated by the ship's AI in real time, smooth and cold, the kind of voice that belonged to someone who had never been told no. The speaker identified himself as Senior Diplomatic Attaché Surul of the Galactic Council. He spoke for 4 minutes without pause. He did not ask questions. He made statements. Humanity had been reviewed. Humanity had been assessed. Humanity had been classified under Tier 3 Protected Species designation, effective immediately. As per Council law, Tier 3 species were required to submit annual tribute, limit their space travel to approved corridors, reduce armed vessels to no more than 12 patrol-class ships total, and provide full geographic disclosure of all settled worlds within 90 standard days. The tribute list came through as a separate data file. Dara opened it. She read it once, then she read it again. Or food stores, biological samples, manufacturing output, colony coordinates, encryption keys to Earth's long-range communication network. Surul finished speaking. The broadcast ended. Static returned. Pell turned around in his chair slowly. He looked at Dara the way people look at someone when they want to know if what they just heard was real. Dara closed the data file. She had grown up in the port city of Mombasa, where the old ocean met the new launch pads, where traders came and went from a dozen worlds, and you learned fast that confidence was the only currency that never lost value. Her father had run cargo before her, his father before him. None of them had ever bowed to anyone. She pulled up the long-range tight beam console. This was not the kind of thing you sent on an open channel. This went directly to Earth, compressed, encrypted, and flagged for the Senate's emergency frequency. She recorded her message in 30 seconds. She described the council ship, its class, its position, the contents of the broadcast, and the tribute list. She included the original data file. Then she added 1 line of her own before sending. They have no idea what they just did. She sent it. She leaned back. She looked out the viewport at the council ship, still sitting there, running light steady, patient the way predators are patient. Pell asked what they should do now. Dara said they should finish the cargo manifest. Pell stared at her. She told him the council ship was not going to fire on a civilian freighter. It would wait for a response from Earth. That would take time. In the meantime, they had a job to do and a delivery schedule to keep. Pell turned back to his console slowly, still unsettled, but he did what she said. What Dara did not say, because Pell did not need to hear it, was that she had grown up listening to her father talk about the other fleets. Not the ones in the public registry, not the patrol ships or the trade escorts that anyone with access to Earth's open database could count and catalog. The other ones. The ones her father had seen once by accident, when a navigation error had taken his ship through a dead zone between systems, and he had come out the other side into the middle of something vast and quiet and completely dark. He had described it to her once. Rows of ships, big ones, no lights, no signals, just sitting there in the cold between stars like they were waiting for a specific moment that had not come yet. He had corrected his course and never spoken of it officially, but he had told Dara, and he had smiled when he told her, the way he smiled when he knew something other people did not. The council ship held position 200 kilometers off the port side. Dara picked up the cargo manifest and kept working. Somewhere between the stars, in the dark zones no telescope pointed at and no trade ship ever crossed, things that had been waiting a long time began, very quietly, to move. Not fast, there was no need for fast. The Council had set a 90-day window for compliance. That was more than enough time. The transmission from Dara Wills reached Earth at 3:40 local Geneva time. By 400, 17 people had been pulled out of bed. By 500, the Senate's emergency chamber was lit up and filling fast. By 600, the full chamber was seated and the doors were sealed. Ambassador Roya Adler read the Council's tribute demand aloud from the podium. She did not editorialize. She did not raise her voice. She read every item on the list in the same flat tone, one after another, until the room had heard all of it. Then she stopped. The silence lasted about 4 seconds. Then the room broke apart. Some senators wanted to send a counter-proposal. Buy time, they said. Learn more about the Council's structure, find the right diplomatic channel, negotiate from a position of information rather than reaction. Others said there was nothing to negotiate. The demand was not a negotiation. It was an instruction. You did not negotiate with an instruction. You refused it or you obeyed it. 2 senators from the outer colonies said their constituents had already heard the broadcast. The Council had sent it on all frequencies, which meant every ship, every station, and every settled world in the sector had received it. People were scared. People wanted to know what Earth was going to do. The argument went in circles for 40 minutes. Fleet Admiral Bram Osa had been sitting in the back row the entire time, saying nothing. He was a large man, broad through the shoulders, with close-cropped gray hair and the kind of stillness that came from decades of making decisions that could not be undone. His uniform was pressed. His hands were flat on his knees. He looked like someone waiting for a bus. Roya called on him. He stood. He walked to the front of the chamber without hurrying. He set a small device on the podium and activated it. A holographic star map appeared above the chamber floor. It was large enough that people in the back rows could read it clearly. On it were ship markers, hundreds of them, spread across a wide arc of space. He let people look at it for a moment. Then he said, "What the Council believes is humanity's full military capability represents less than 8% of what actually exists." The chamber went quiet in a different way than before. Not the quiet of argument paused, the quiet of people recalculating. He explained it without drama. For 30 years, Earth had maintained 2 parallel fleets. The registered fleet, which appeared in all public databases and was visible to any species with access to trade monitoring networks, was real. It performed real functions: escort, patrol, search, and rescue. But it was also a number that other species could see and measure and feel comfortable about. The other fleet had been built in the dark zones. Asteroid belt shipyards that ran cold, no heat bloom, no electromagnetic signature above background noise. Supply lines routed through dead corridors that no trade ship used. Construction crews who signed agreements that made the old state secrets look casual. He pulled up a second display. Ship classes. Carriers 3 times the size of anything in the registered fleet. Destroyers with full drive capability and weapons arrays that had never been listed in any public document. Smaller fast ships built for specific purposes that he did not describe in detail. He said, "The Council gave us 90 days to comply. We do not need 90 days. Roya asked him what he was proposing. He said he was not proposing anything aggressive. He was proposing a demonstration, one that required no weapons to be fired, no threats to be made, and no territory to be crossed. A demonstration that would communicate, clearly and permanently, the nature of the miscalculation the Council had made." A senator from the northern districts asked whether this would start a war. Bram said that starting a war required 2 sides willing to fight. After the demonstration, the Council would not be willing. He was confident of that. He said it the same way he said everything else, without raising his voice, without smiling, like someone reading from a manual they had written themselves. The vote was called. 312 senators in favor, 41 opposed, 9 abstentions. Roya looked at Bram. He nodded once and walked back to his seat in the back row, picking up a small comm unit as he sat down. His first call was short. The person on the other end answered on the first ring, which meant they had been waiting. The message was 4 words. Begin the transit sequence. Out in the dark zones between systems where no telescope pointed and no beacon blinked, ships that had been sitting cold and silent for a very long time began to move. Quietly at first, then with purpose. Their fold drives spun up in sequence, one class at a time, and they began crossing the distance between the dark and the light. The Council's 90-day window had 11 weeks remaining. Humanity would be ready in 4 days. Surel had been waiting for 6 days. He was not accustomed to waiting. In 30 years of Council diplomatic service, he had delivered 11 species into Tier 3 compliance status. The longest any of them had taken to respond was 41 hours. Most responded within a day. Some within hours, their leadership so rattled by the sight of a council ship that they began drafting surrender terms before the broadcast had even finished playing. Humanity had taken 6 days and sent nothing. No acknowledgement, no counterproposal, no request for clarification or extension, not even a distress signal from their civilian freighter, which was still sitting 200 kilometers off his port side, running its cargo route as if nothing had happened. His second officer suggested they increase the broadcast frequency, remind the humans of the deadline. Surel said no. He had learned early in his career that repeating a demand communicated weakness. You said it once, you waited. On the morning of the 7th day, a transmission arrived. It was not a voice message. It was a data package, compressed and formally structured. His communications team spent 2 hours verifying its encryption before opening it. Inside was a single video file. Surel watched it in his private office. A woman sat at a plain desk. No flag behind her, no decorations on the wall, no uniformed officers standing at her sides for gravity. Just a desk, a chair, and a woman with short silver hair and a dark coat who looked directly at the camera as if she was looking directly at him. She introduced herself as Ambassador Roya Adler of the United Earth Senate. She spoke for 6 minutes. Humanity declined the tribute designation. Humanity did not recognize the authority of the Galactic Council to classify sovereign species without mutual consent, legal precedent established by the species in question, or military occupation of that species' territory, none of which conditions currently applied. Humanity was formally withdrawing its observer status from the Galactic Council, effective the date of this transmission. All Council diplomatic personnel operating in human space had 72 hours to depart through designated exit corridors, after which their presence would be considered an act of trespass. She paused for exactly 2 seconds. Then she said, "We suggest you look out your window." The recording ended. Surel sat still for a moment. Then he stood and walked to the viewport. The first ship came out of fold space close enough that the distortion wave rocked his cruiser slightly. It was enormous. Dark gray, angular, no markings on the hull except a small Earth emblem near the prow. Its running lights were white and steady. Its weapons were in rest position. It said nothing and did nothing. It simply appeared and held position. Then another came, port side further out. Then 3 more. Then 6. Then they stopped being countable as individual events and became a single continuous phenomenon, ships emerging from fold space in all directions, each one finding its position in a formation that had clearly been planned long before this week, and holding there without drift, without deviation, without a single communication on any frequency. Surel counted. He stopped at 40 and called for his tactical officer. His tactical officer came to the viewport, looked out, and did not say anything for a long time. When he finally spoke, he said there were 112 capital-class vessels in confirmed sensor range. He said there were likely more outside sensor range. He said the smallest ship in the formation was 3 times the displacement of their own cruiser. He said he was reading weapons systems on the human carriers that he did not have classification codes for, which meant they were not in any Council intelligence database. He said all of this in a very careful, very controlled voice. Cyril told him to open a channel to Council Command. The channel took 9 minutes to establish. When Council Command came through, Cyril described what was outside his viewport. He described it accurately and without embellishment because the situation required no embellishment. There was a long pause on the other end. Then Council Command told him to hold position and await further instructions. Cyril looked out the viewport again. The human fleet had not moved. No ship had come closer. No weapon had been powered up. No communication had been sent on any channel. They were simply present, 112 capital-class warships sitting in perfect formation in the dark between stars, running lights steady, like they had been there forever and planned to stay forever and felt absolutely no urgency about any of it. The civilian freighter was still there too. Still running its cargo route. Still acting like nothing had happened. Cyril had been in diplomatic service for 30 years. He had a talent, carefully developed, for reading situations clearly without letting emotion interfere. He read this situation clearly. He went back to his desk and began composing a personal message to his family, marked non-official, low priority, personal correspondence only. He suggested they consider visiting his brother on the far side of Council space for a while, just for a change of scenery. The Galactic Council had existed for 230 years. In that time it had absorbed 41 species, mediated 9 interstellar conflicts, established trade law across 6 sectors, and built a reputation for being the kind of organization that did not make mistakes. When the Council moved, it moved with certainty. When it spoke, smaller species listened. When it extended its designation authority, compliance followed as naturally as gravity. It had never been told no, and had that no backed up by 112 warships. Council member Pethara of the Voth called the emergency session herself, which was unusual. Emergency sessions were typically called by the administrative chair. Pethara calling it meant she was not willing to wait for the chair to decide whether it was an emergency. The chamber filled in under an hour. 17 species represented, 43 council members, aides and analysts packed into the upper observation ring. The displays showed Cyril's sensor data, the human fleet formation, the weapons classification gaps, the displacement numbers. Nobody spoke for almost a full minute after the data finished cycling. Then everyone spoke at once. The Voth bloc wanted an immediate show of force. Dispatch 3 carrier groups to the sector, establish a perimeter, demonstrate that the Council's authority was not subject to renegotiation. Pethara argued this loudly and at length, her heavy hands flat on the table, her voice carrying the particular force of someone who had spent decades being right. The Dren representative, a lean and careful diplomat named Varos, said nothing for the first 20 minutes. When he finally spoke, he said one thing. He said, "What is our military assessment of an engagement with the human fleet at current confirmed strength?" The Council's defense analyst pulled up the numbers. She read them aloud. She had a flat professional voice and she used it without flinching. Projected Council losses in a direct engagement, between 60 and 80% of any force sent. Projected human losses, unknown because their weapons systems had no classification data and therefore no reliable countermeasure profile. Timeline to Council military recovery, 14 to 20 years minimum. She paused and added that the 112 confirmed ships were the ships they could see. Intelligence assessment suggested a significant probability of additional reserve capacity, not yet deployed. Pethara said the analyst was being defeatist. Varos said the analyst was doing her job. 3 other council members sided with Varos. A fourth said nothing, but pushed her chair back slightly from the Voth block side of the table, which was a small movement that everyone in the room noticed. The debate shifted from what to do about the human fleet to what to do about the fact that other species were watching. Because they were watching. Within 12 hours of the human fleet's appearance, 6 different species with council observer status had submitted quiet diplomatic inquiries asking for clarification on the situation. 2 of them, the Dren and the Harak, had transmitted messages directly to Earth expressing what they carefully called solidarity with the principle of sovereign species self-determination. That was the phrase that landed hardest in the chamber. Sovereign species self-determination. That phrase had history. There were 3 council member species sitting in that room right now who had used that exact phrase 20 years ago when they were still outside the council and resisting pressure to join. The council had eventually convinced them through trade incentives and security guarantees. But the phrase had been used, and now it was being used again, pointed not at the council's enemies but at the council itself. Pethara slammed her hand on the table. She said the council could not afford to be seen backing down. Backing down would unravel 40 years of authority. Every species under observation designation would see it. Every species currently in compliance negotiations would use it. The council's entire model of governance depended on the credibility of its authority. Varos said that credibility had 2 components. The threat of force was one. The wisdom not to use force badly was the other. He said the council had spent 200 years building the second one, and they should not burn it trying to save the first. The room went quiet again. Someone from the intelligence division slipped in through a side door and handed the administrative chair a data slip. The chair read it, kept his face neutral, and read it again. He announced that the Harak had formally suspended their tribute payments pending review of their classification status. The silence in the room changed character entirely. Pethara sat down. She did not say anything else for the rest of the session. Outside the chamber, in corridors and side offices and encrypted personal channels, the real conversations had already started. The ones about what the council actually was, what it had always been, and whether a structure built on the assumption that smaller species would always be afraid had made a calculation error so large it could not be quietly corrected. In Sector 7, a human fleet of 112 ships held its formation and waited, lights steady, weapons cold, saying nothing. They did not need to say anything. The silence was doing the work for them. Nobody expected the shuttle. Sural's crew picked it up on short-range sensors first. A small human craft coming out of the fleet formation slowly, no weapon signature, no electronic interference, running its transponder openly on the standard diplomatic frequency. It was the size of a personal transport, built for maybe 8 people, and it was heading directly for the council cruiser at a speed that communicated it was in no hurry. Sural's second officer asked whether to power up point defense. Sural said no. He said to open a channel. The shuttle identified itself as carrying 1 passenger. Fleet Admiral Bram Osai, United Earth Senate Armed Forces, requesting permission to board for a diplomatic conversation. No security detail. No recorded transmission. Off the books, which in diplomatic language meant the kind of conversation where both sides could say things that would never appear in an official document. Sural stared at the incoming shuttle for a long moment. Then he granted docking clearance. Bram walked off the shuttle carrying nothing. No bag, no data pad, no weapon. He wore his full dress uniform with every decoration in its proper place, which was its own kind of statement. He looked like someone who had arrived at an event he had planned to attend for a very long time. Cyril met him in the docking bay. He had brought no aides either. Whatever this was, both of them understood it was between two people and not their institutions. They went to a small meeting room off the main corridor. Bram sat down. Cyril sat across from him. A crew member brought 2 cups of something warm and then left and closed the door. Bram spoke first. He said he wanted to be honest, because he thought honesty was more useful than performance at this point. He said the fleet outside was not the entirety of what Earth had. He said that if the Council sent a military response, the Council would lose, and the loss would be large enough that it would not recover its authority in this sector for a generation. He said he was not saying this as a threat. He was saying it as a fact, the way a navigator gives a pilot accurate information about weather, because the pilot needs accurate information to make a good decision. Cyril said nothing. Bram said, the Council made an assumption about humanity that was incorrect. The assumption was that humanity, like most species the Council had encountered, built its military to the minimum necessary for its own defense and no further. He said that assumption made sense based on historical patterns. Most species stopped building once they felt safe. Humans did not stop building once they felt safe. Humans built past the point of safety into a range that other species did not have a good word for, because most species had never done it. Cyril asked why. It was the first thing he had said since Bram sat down. Bram thought about it for a moment. He said he was not sure he could fully explain it. He said humans came from a world that had tried to kill them for a very long time, whether disease, predators, each other, and they had developed a habit of preparing for problems that had not happened yet. He said the Dark Fleet was not built because Earth expected the Council to do exactly this. It was built because Earth expected that at some point someone would try something, and it was better to be ready before the moment than during it. He said, we did not build those ships out of aggression. We built them out of habit. Cyril was quiet for a long time. Then he asked what humanity wanted. Bram said, not much. Formal recognition of full human sovereignty on record. Retraction of the tribute demand and the Tier 3 classification, also on record. Open trade lanes maintained as they were before this week. No reparations, no apology required, no public announcement that would embarrass the Council in front of its members. Cyril asked about the Harak suspension of tribute payments. Bram said that was between the Harak and the Council. Earth had not suggested it and could not withdraw it. Cyril asked about the Dren's solidarity statement. Bram said the same thing. There was another silence, longer this time. Cyril asked what humanity would do if the Council refused. Bram picked up the warm cup on his side of the table. He drank from it slowly. He set it back down. He said the fleet would remain in position until the Council made a decision either way. He said Earth was not going to fire first. He said Earth was also not going to move the fleet, not one ship, not 1 kilometer, until this was resolved in writing. He said, we have very good food on the carrier. We can wait as long as necessary. Cyril looked at him. Bram looked back, the way someone looks when they are telling the absolute truth, and they know it and they are not uncomfortable about it at all. Cyril said he would transmit the terms to Council command. Bram nodded. He finished the warm drink. He stood up, shook Cyril's hand with a firm grip that lasted exactly as long as it needed to, and walked back to his shuttle. Cyril sat alone in the meeting room for a while after the shuttle left. He thought about 30 years of diplomatic service, 11 species brought into compliance, a career built on the certainty that the Council's authority was the largest thing in any room he entered. He thought about 112 warships sitting outside his viewport, doing nothing, needing to do nothing. He sent the terms to Council command. He marked it urgent. The agreement was signed on a station called Relay 4. It was a small place, not much more than a fuel depot and a communications hub sitting at the edge of the neutral corridor between human space and Council territory. Nobody important had ever signed anything there before. That was probably why it was chosen. Roya Adler signed for Earth. The Council sent a mid-level administrative official named Purath, who had kind eyes and a nervous manner, and kept his formal robes very still as if stillness could make the moment less significant than it was. He signed without reading the document aloud, which was the traditional Council ceremony for formal agreements. He signed quickly, the way you do when you want a thing to be over. Roya signed slowly, the way you do when you want a thing to be remembered. The document said three things. Humanity was a fully sovereign species under no external jurisdiction. The tribute demand and Tier 3 classification were retracted and struck from the Council's official record. Trade routes between human space and Council territory remained open under existing terms. That was it, no ceremony after. No meal, no reception, no photographs for official archives. Purath left within the hour. Roya stayed long enough to send a short transmission to Earth, then she left too. 2 days later, the human fleet began folding back into deep space. They went the same way they had come, quietly and without announcement. No ship sent a final broadcast. No admiral gave a speech. They simply disappeared one by one back into the dark zones, running lights off, fold drives cycling, gone before anyone watching could count how many had left versus how many remained. Within a week the formation was empty. Clean space where 112 warships had been, the stars looking exactly as they always had, as if nothing had ever been there at all. But the galaxy had eyes, and the galaxy had memory. On a Harak trading station 6 sectors away, a dock official named Sira had been following the story through second-hand transmissions and corridor rumors, and the careful silences of Council representatives who had stopped being quite as certain in their posture as they used to be. She had worked that station for 19 years. In that time, she had watched 4 species accept Council designation without complaint. She had watched trade route fees go up 3 times without explanation. She had watched Council inspection teams board Harak vessels and take inventory of cargo that was none of their business. And she had watched Harak captains bow their heads and let it happen because the alternative was losing their operating license. She had thought that was simply how things were. The day the retraction document leaked onto the open network, which it did within 72 hours because things like that always leaked, Sira read it standing at her desk during a shift change. She read it twice. Then she printed it, which nobody did anymore, and pinned it to the board above her workstation. Her supervisor asked what it was. She said it was a document she wanted to look at every day. On a Dren diplomatic vessel near the border zone, Varos was composing a quiet letter to 3 other Council member species whose representatives had been asking, privately and carefully, whether there were others who felt the way the Dren felt. Not ready for any action, not proposing anything specific, just asking whether they were alone. Varos was writing back to tell them they were not alone. On Sural's cruiser, now heading back to Council Central Station, Sural was writing his end-of-mission report. He was a careful and honest man, and he wrote it carefully and honestly. He described every event in sequence. He included his own assessment at the end. He wrote that the Council's intelligence model for evaluating non-member species had a structural error. It assumed that species built power in proportion to their felt threat level. Humanity's felt threat level had never been particularly high. Humanity's power accumulation had continued regardless. He wrote that this represented a category of behavior the Council had not previously encountered and would need to account for going forward. He submitted the report and did not expect it to be well received. He was correct about that. Back on Dara Will's freighter, 14 days after the whole thing had started, she was 3 sectors away running a standard cargo route when Pell picked up a general broadcast from a Dren news service. The broadcast was about the retraction agreement. It was 4 minutes long and ended with a phrase that some Dren political commentator had coined that was apparently spreading through non-council networks fast enough to be worth reporting on. The phrase was, "the ones who said no." Pell read it aloud and then looked at Dara. Dara was checking a cargo manifest. She did not look up. She said, "Log it and move on. We have a delivery window to hit." Pell logged it. They hit the window. Somewhere in the dark zones between systems, in shipyards that ran cold and quiet and registered no heat bloom above background, construction crews who had never stopped working kept not stopping. The ships they built went into formation in the dark and held there and waited, the way they had always waited, patient and ready and invisible to everyone who had not thought to look. No one from the council looked. They had learned, in the way that lessons like this stick, that looking had consequences they were not prepared to pay. And so the dark stayed dark. And the ships stayed where they were. And humanity went back to work.